Hey everybody, welcome back to Catechumens Depart. I'm Eric Anderson.
And I'm Father Mark Kozak from the Assumption of the Holy Virgin Mary Church in South Philadelphia, Pennsylvania.
Thanks for joining us again today. If this is your first time joining us, we welcome you. If not, welcome back. Father Mark, we touched a little bit at the end of the last show on such things as the Enlightenment, the Protestant Reformation, stuff like that, um, as ways of understanding our current day situation. But I've thought about it a little bit this week, and I think that we need to backfill even more so we can talk about contemporary issues. We need to understand the past better. And as a historian, I know you have a pretty good handle on that. So I was hoping maybe you could help talk about the situation of the church at its outset, how it was one for quite some time, and then basically became bifurcated in what is often called the Great Schism, which is often very sort of like, not arbitrarily, it's pinned to one date, which is not really that simple. And then, so if we could talk about that sort of, those underpinnings a bit today to help move us forward and understand where we are today. Um,
Okay.
no big task.
No, it's not a big
Just,
task.
I mean, we're going to try to keep it to 30 minutes today so we don't just bore you guys to tears. So, no pressure. Could you give us the entire history of the church up to the 12th century in 30 minutes? Go.
Okay. The first place we need to start is how the early church was organized. This was not done in a haphazard way, but it was organized in big cities across the Roman Empire. There would be a group of Jews and people who were interested in Judaism, and then people that were interested in Christianity would come together, and they would go to the synagogue at first, and then go to someone's home and have partake of the body and blood of Christ. Christianity is an Eastern religion, not a Western religion, as commonly is called. It's something that comes from the West, it comes from the East. So when the first apostles left Jerusalem, they went out to these various cities and these various groups, and they would form little church communities with local leaders in these cities. And these cities were often called metropolises in Greek. And the area around them was a Roman designation known as diocese.
No kidding.
If this sounds familiar, thank you for a semi-good Western civilization education that you received. So the early church for the first 300 years had small churches downtown in the city, and then they would go out into the suburbs of the city and establish small churches. And this went on for about 300 years between times of persecution and times of less persecution. There wasn't really a time of no persecution. What was interesting was the church grew slowly in this way, mostly because we lost so many people to persecution.
Yeah.
It became popular to some people because it was the church of peace, the church of people that loved one another. So they were following after one of his two main commandments. And it was new to many people. But it wasn't overly organized. Now, when I say Church of the East, I mean there was hundreds of churches in what is now Asia Minor, what is now Turkey, what is now Syria, what is now Greece and northern Greece, and there was one major church in the West. And it just happened to be on the Tiber River happened to be the capital of the Roman Empire, also known as Rome.
Mm-hmm.
And these were founded by the apostles and their disciples into the first and second millennium. So it took 100 or 200 years for these first churches to be founded. So we know about this partially through Acts, which we're reading right now in church until this weekend.
Mm-hmm.
And we know from church history that this is what happened. Now, this will come as a surprise to many people because many people have an idea, a sort of legendary idea, that church history began in the 1500s, or people couldn't write in 200 AD, or there wasn't anything written down, and what was written down isn't important. Guess what? It's all important.
Mm-hmm.
It's all connected to each other in an unbroken line of, in some towns in Greece today, an unbroken line from St. Paul down to the current bishop.
Mm-hmm.
In one of the towns, I think it might be, I forget which town it was now, but I think there were 273 bishops at this particular town, starting with St. Paul.
Oh, that's great.
So, tradition with a capital T continues.
Mm-hmm.
But it is an Eastern faith that slowly grows in the West, off to Spain with the Roman legions, up to what's now France and Great Britain. But the major church, the only one founded by an apostle in the West, is Rome. And they had the most influence over the other churches. So in a sense today, it would be like having one person in Washington, D.C., and the rest of the country would be directly under that one person. So we call that in theological and historical ecclesiastical terms as having jurisdiction, total jurisdiction over everything.
Okay.
That's what the bishop in Rome had. In the East, we had hundreds of bishops that were all equal, that had jurisdiction within their own diocese alone.
But Rome was not more powerful than the Eastern bishops, right?
No, not in the
The
Eastern.
Pope was still
The Pope, he
an
became
equal.
right. He became the father. Pope is just father.
Mm-hmm.
There are other popes too. The Pope of Alexandria
Mm-hmm.
and so on. So basically, what happens politically, and why this is so important, why are we talking about Roman Empire politics? Well, the church was not a part of the Roman Empire, but the church was in the Roman Empire.
Mm-hmm.
It wasn't out only in the catacombs. They came out of the catacombs.
Mm-hmm.
It wasn't a rural church. It was a city church.
Mm-hmm.
So in the early 300s, there was a horrible, truly horrible martyrdom. Hundreds and hundreds and thousands were martyred under the Emperor Diocletian. But he did something very interesting. He split the empire into two parts. He had an eastern part and a western part. And they were supposed to function together. Each part had an Augustus, which was the emperor, and had a Caesar, which was a junior emperor, someone emperor in training.
Okay.
And the empire was supposed to work this way and work a little bit better, and it sort of worked for a little while until people's ambitions got very exciting and everything else. But for the church's sake, in 312, one of the Caesars, whose name was Constantine, whose father had been a Caesar too, declared basically that there would be religious tolerance for Christians in his part of the empire. So Christians were granted religious tolerance. They weren't supported per se, but they were granted tolerance in his part of the empire.
But not in the Western part.
But not in the West.
Okay.
He becomes sole emperor in 323, and Christianity is given basically its political freedom, quote unquote, at that time. Mm-hmm. If you all were watching our not Zoom, our film of the
our live stream.
Our live stream on Sunday. We talked about the First Ecumenical Council, which was called by the Emperor Constantine in 325, which was in the East.
Mm-hmm.
Nicaea was in the East, wasn't called in Rome.
Mm-hmm.
It was called in the East. And 318 bishops came there, and they started to hammer out what the church believed. When was Easter? How do we do some services? What were these? There were three mega bishops that were to be honored: Rome, Alexandria, and Antioch.
Okay.
They were the three largest churches, and they had some jurisdiction over churches in their area.
And then what are the others? Jerusalem and...
But not yet, not yet. No.
No spoilers. No spoilers.
I will tell you when that's going to happen. That'll be soon. Okay? So the council was in the East, and the fathers of the first council, after coming up with the creed, which is extremely important, most of the creed, not all of the creed, went out back home and met again in 381 under Emperor Theodosius. And they hammered out the last part of the creed, which is known as the Nicene Constantinopolitan Creed, which is a little hard to say.
Say that a few times.
Say that 4 times fast, and blah, blah, blah. But also called the Nicene Creed, which we in the Orthodox Church and in other Christian communities say today.
Yeah, we used to say it at our Episcopal church
Yep.
back when we were
And
Episcopalian.
the Roman Catholic Church says it too.
Mm-hmm.
So it explains a number of things: who God the Father is, who the Son is, who the Holy Spirit is, how they relate to each other. In the West, Rome decided these things were going to happen. The authority went out from Rome. It was basically done. In the East, they fought, they had councils together, they had something, one of my favorite terms in church history is robber councils.
Ooh.
They were councils that were made of robbers. It was chaotic in the East. But by 381, it sort of had settled down. One emperor, 2 centers of power. One was Constantinople and one was Rome. And that in 381 is when Constantinople became one of the major bishops, the mega bishop, also called patriarchs now. So he became the Patriarch of Constantinople, the bishop there. The Patriarch of Rome was the Bishop of Rome. Patriarch of Alexandria was the Bishop of Egypt and all of Africa. The Patriarch of Antioch was the Bishop of Syria and all the East. And that's still in their titles today, if you were to commemorate them. So 4 of those patriarchs are from the East, still.
I think I've glimpsed the Patriarch of Jerusalem when we were there.
Mm-hmm. So this was called the Pentarchy, which means 5, group of 5. Did the Pentarchy work all the time? Not necessarily. It was supposed to. It was a good idea, sort of. But they didn't get together and have corporate meetings or anything like that. That didn't really work out too well.
They didn't have Zoom back then?
They did not have Zoom.
They might have been happier without Zoom.
And they did not Skype each other every day and do any of that. So, but the church sort of held itself together through the next century, which had some major controversy, formulated basically in the East. One, who the Virgin Mary was. Was she the mother of Jesus or the mother of Christ? Mm-hmm. And she became, in the Third Ecumenical Council in Ephesus, she became known as the Theotokos, the one who bore God, what the word means. So she obviously was the mother of Christ, the mother of God. In the Fourth Council, there was a major problems from Alexandria in Syria, where the Pope in Rome, Gregory, came to the council, and in Chalcedon, which is also in Asia Minor, and basically we hammered out who Christ is. Christ is fully God and fully man, and was supposed to put an end to this crisis. So it was the Pope, Bishop of Rome, that helped lead that.
Okay.
emperor called the council. The Pope helped lead that particular charge with the other bishops that went after him. In the East, the bishops' power and authority remained very stable within their own dioceses. The canons of the various councils and the smaller councils reflect that.
Oh, Father Mark, sorry. Picture your mic has turned inward. I just don't
I'm
want
inward
people
now.
to.
Okay, there we go.
There we go.
Okay,
That
there we
should
go.
do it.
All right. So, but in the West, Rome remained supreme. It had the total authority. It had primacy, and then after 476, it had no emperor. That was the end of the western part of the Roman Empire, and there was a very large power vacuum that was filled at times by various Germanic tribes that came from the east. But in political terms, vis-a-vis the church, it was filled by the Bishop of Rome.
Okay.
So he acquired not direct temporal power over all the West, but understood that he had a great deal of influence over the West. In the East, you had hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of bishops that may have had influence with political people, maybe did not, but they were the head of their individual dioceses. So the church, this is how the church was organized in the first millennium.
Okay.
There were fractures on each side in the 6th and the 7th century, especially starting in the 7th century with Islam. Mm-hmm. The emperors in the East wanted to not placate Muslims, but to hold back the Muslims. Mm-hmm. So they wanted to make changes about who Jesus was, that he was sort of like God and sort of like man, and he sort of functioned in this way and sort of that way. Well, sort of and I guess are not words that we use theologically in the Orthodox Church. And that didn't go over too well with the Orthodox population that was led by monastics and the regular people, not necessarily by bishops. And there was the biggest blow up of all of this, of course, happened from 726 to 787, known as the iconoclastic controversy, where the emperor and his bishops and others basically took all the icons, church paintings, any kind of church art and art out of the churches, literally picked crosses out of the wall with chisels and so on and so forth. And the emperor supported this, and but in 787, Orthodoxy came back, and icons came back to the churches, and it should sort of even things out. Mm-hmm. But by that time, you had 700 years of having an Eastern and a Western empire and an Eastern and a Western church. Mm-hmm. And by that time, the church in Rome spoke Roman and its various derivatives that become, of course, French, and Spanish, and Italian, and so on. But the church in the East spoke Greek, Roman in Constantinople itself, among the administration of the empire, but it spoke a myriad of other languages.
Okay.
Hundreds and hundreds of different languages. And it set up itself for the 8th century for something that didn't work at first, but then did work. And it's our first point of the church breaking itself apart, but it's also our first point of the church putting itself back together. And I'm referring to basically the mission work that was done among Western Slavic tribes, what's now Poland and Czech Republic, Slovakia, Serbia, Yugoslavia, that part of the world. The German monks on the one side who spoke Roman and were under the Pope, and Cyril and Methodius, who were two Byzantine missionaries who were actually friends of the emperor, knew the emperor, Constantinople, coming from the east. And they came and sort of bashed with each other, and something really extraordinary happened at first. Methodius and Cyril traveled to Rome and get the permission of the Pope to be missionaries of these Western Slavic people. So they become missionaries for both groups, the Western and the Eastern parts of the church. Unfortunately, this fell apart when the Pope died, but their mission did not.
Okay.
Their mission did not last in what's now Poland, Czechoslovakia, Czech Republic, Slovakia, and so on, because if it did, then they'd all be Orthodox.
Yeah,
right
those
now.
would be Orthodox countries.
But they aren't. But it did work in one place.
Bulgaria.
And it worked in Bulgaria. And that's where the disciples of St. Cyril and Methodius went to and basically put together alphabet that's called Cyrillic now.
Oh.
But really after the missionary, after St. Cyril. But it's really something that these 12 to 15 their disciples put together. Among them were Clement of Ohrid, who's one of the major players of this. So they put together a Slavic divine liturgy, a Slavic gospel, and what became known as a package of Christianity that was in Slavic.
Okay.
So that you can take this package to any Slavic place and give it to the ruler or give it to the group of people and say, this is what we do.
Rather than like a slow accretion that had happened in the other places.
Then rather than bring in the Roman language, bring in some political power and everything else.
Mm-hmm.
So this package became extraordinarily important in the history of the eastern part of the church. We were still together then.
Mm-hmm.
There were conflicts between both sides. One of the biggest conflicts happened in the middle part of the 1000s, where the Patriarch of Constantinople closed down some Roman churches in the city, and the Pope became upset, and there were words passed to and fro. There was communication then, but going between Constantinople and Rome at that time wasn't
wasn't like tweeting at somebody.
It wasn't like tweeting or Facebook or anything, and it didn't work too well either. So what happened is the Pope sent an emissary to Constantinople. Humbert was his name. He was a cardinal, and he basically put on the altar of Hagia Sophia in 1054 a bull of excommunication of the Patriarch of Constantinople, saying that he had done all of these things to the Roman churches in the city of Constantinople, and he's excommunicated. Well, this is where many historians in the West and some historians in the East make a really common error. They say this is the date that the schism happened.
1054.
1054 or boom, or that's it. And no.
Right.
No. Number one is the legality of the papal bull. The Pope just happened to have died 3 weeks before this bull was put on the altar. So I'm not sure about Roman law myself, but there's some doubts about that.
Yeah, maybe like dead guys can't issue edicts.
Humbert himself was not one of the greatest ambassadors in the world. I don't think he would be someone that you would like to invite for dinner. He had a temper. He left in a huff and went back to Rome, and things were sort of confused for a period of time. Byzantium lived on at this time for a little long period of time for a few decades, until it was almost destroyed by Turkic peoples at Mazankirt. It was a horrible battle. The church continued to help the state, continue to be a part of the state, not in the sense of a department of the state, but a part of the fabric of the state. And in the West, something equally important happens, known as the Gregorian Reforms. Pope Gregory, at the latter part of the 11th century, basically wanted to clean up the Roman Church, and he did, and he abolished things like celibacy for non-celibacy for clergy, a different, less flexible view of canons, of the sacraments, and so on and so forth. This takes a couple hundred years to happen, but the West moved further this way, and the East was stuck with invasion upon invasion upon invasion, which would have been okay, except in 1095, Pope Urban II makes a great statement in his cathedral and says, we need to help our Eastern brethren and we need to recover the Holy Lands. So I'm calling for a crusade to go over and do these things. Well, the crusade for a short period of time recovered the Holy Lands, but what it did for church history and for the schism was something even more important. This is basically where Christian East and Christian West meets again. And they really didn't know each other very well. And some of them didn't really like each other very well. They didn't treat each other very well. They did not respect each other very well. And there were two more crusades that went through Constantinople to receive supplies and everything else, the Second and Third Crusade. And then the fourth one went crazy. The Pope calls the Crusades, gets the support of the Venetian merchants, and instead of going to the Holy Land, got stuck in Constantinople and basically ravaged the city and took over what was left of the Byzantine Empire. And this is basically 1204 is a good marking point between the break between the two churches.
More decisive.
More decisive than the 1054 break. It makes a lot more sense.
Yeah.
For 60 years, there was a Roman Patriarch of Constantinople, a Roman Patriarch of Antioch, a Roman Patriarch of Jerusalem, a Roman Emperor in Constantinople, and Constantinople remained in fragments until they finally got themselves together in the 1270s, 1260s and 1270s, and retook Constantinople again. At that time, by this time, Byzantium, the Byzantine Empire, the Eastern Roman Empire, there was no Byzantium per se, was a very small shadow of itself.
Yeah.
But still Christian. And because of the package, Christianity was going to Bulgaria, Serbia, what became Ukraine, what became Bielorussia, and Russia as things go on.
Okay.
So all these places were being missionized by Orthodox missionaries. And
as Byzantium
slowly fades away.
Okay.
So the break itself comes in 1204. Rome calls for a union council in 1274 in Lyon, which is basically telling the council that the church in Constantinople and all of its bishops and everything need to be under Rome. That's the way it is. That's the way it's always been. We have total jurisdiction over all of you. And unfortunately, the emperor and the patriarch agreed because they were under persecution. But there was another council that was called after that in 1285 that basically said, no, we are not under you. This is our first complaint. We are not just people. We're not just people that wear beards, and they were throwing little political things across the board, sort of like we do today on Facebook and everything else. So the folks in the West would say, well, they wear beards, and the folks in the East would say, well, they don't wear beards. And the folks
The
in the
horror.
West would say something like, "Well, they use too much warm water in the Eucharist," and back and forth, and these little things that sort of heated up the flames.
Yeah.
But on the theological side, which we haven't discussed yet,
Ooh.
there was something big.
Maybe we want to. Do you want to save that? We're at half an hour now.
We're at a half an hour already, so we're going to save that because we're going to talk about something that has been confused and manipulated and just messed with for the last 1,500 years. And still, our lack of understanding is humongous.
Profound? Okay.
Profound. Good. So we'll wait until that, and then we can talk about my favorite subjects, the union councils, that none of which worked.
I was going to say, those. I'm thinking like it's a spoiler that didn't
Yeah,
happen.
sorry, I wanted to tell you that.
Yeah, okay.
So just
okay.
yeah. So I'm sorry, I shouldn't say any questions. You're interviewing me. Sorry.
No. If you have any, I don't have any questions. I think we covered everything pretty thoroughly. I don't want to get into the whole Oriental Orthodox thing and all. That's not really part of what we're going over. So I don't think I have anything else. Do you have anything that you may have left out or that you want to fill in for people?
Just like a little star at the bottom. This isn't the complete history of this.
Right.
We've been studying this from the beginning. This was something that's a living, not movement, but something that's living and breathing as we speak.
Yeah.
There are talks between Rome and the Orthodox Church as we are speaking right now.
Yeah.
And have been for since 1274.
Yeah.
So we are talking about it, which is good.
Yeah, it's like it's not binary, it's not black and white. It's
Right,
complicated and long, and it's not us and them. It's sort of more nuanced. Great. Well, thank you, Father.
You're welcome. Thank you.
I hope you guys enjoyed our second episode. And so next time, as Father said, we'll be talking about more of the theological aspects that help divide the church a bit. So until next time, we'll just bid you catechumens depart. Bye.